There's a sound that arrives before you're ready for it. It isn't urgent, it doesn't strike, it doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It's a bass line that comes in slowly, as if it had always been there before the song even started, as if the silence before it was already part of it. Then comes the hit, but not where you expect it. It lands a little later, in the gap, in the space that any other rhythm would have filled without thinking. And in that gap, in that deliberate delay, in that breath the music decides to take before it says anything, lies much of the secret behind what makes reggae unlike almost everything else. This isn't music that rushes, it's music that holds. And in that capacity to hold, there's something that goes far beyond aesthetics. There's a way of understanding time, voice, and message that was born in a very specific place from a very real experience, and that ended up becoming one of the most recognizable and most meaningful musical languages in modern history. Jamaica, in the second half of the 20th century, was an island going through a profound transformation. Independence from British rule came in 1962, but political freedom didn't suddenly resolve the tensions left behind by centuries of colonialism, slavery, and inequality. In the cities, especially in Kingston, a young urban population was growing, one with limited access and a great deal of awareness. A population that needed to name itself, that needed a sound it could call its own, one that reflected not what others had said about them, but what they had to say about themselves and about the world they lived in. That need had already found a partial answer in ska, a lively, high-energy music that blended influences from American jazz and rhythm and blues with something distinctly Jamaican. Then came rocksteady, which slowed things down, settled the bass, and opened space for heavier lyrics. Reggae was the next step, but it wasn't just a technical evolution, it was a deepening of spirit. Something in the sound shifted to carry more weight. The tempo became more deliberate, the rhythmic counterweight more pronounced, and the bass stopped being just harmonic support and became the true emotional center of the song. In most Western popular music, the bass accompanies. In reggae, the bass leads. That inversion of hierarchy isn't a production quirk, it's a statement. When the instrument that was historically pushed to the background moves to the center, something in the logic of the music changes. The melody is no longer the only thing that matters, or even the first thing you truly hear. What moves you, what grounds you, what communicates without words is that low frequency that vibrates through the body before it ever reaches the ear, clearly. There's something physical in that, something that speaks to a place in us that exists before analysis. The offbeat completes the picture. Instead of landing on the 1 and the 3, as much music rooted in European tradition does, reggae accents the 2 and the 4, or more precisely, the rhythm guitar chops in the gaps between the strong beats. The result is an unusual feeling for a first-time listener. The music always seems on the verge of resolving, always in gentle tension, always moving forward without hurry, but without stopping either. That tension isn't discomfort, it's dialogue. It's the music in conversation with itself, giving itself time, choosing not to rush. And in that choice not to rush, there's a stance. Not passivity, but determination. Reggae tells the listener that some things can't be said in a hurry, that certain truths need room to settle, that urgency isn't always strength, and that calm isn't surrender. That lesson doesn't come from a manual. It comes through the body, through listening. Spirituality was part of reggae from very early on, and not as decoration. Rastafari, a religious and political movement that grew throughout Jamaica during the 20th century, gave reggae much of its vocabulary, its cosmology, and its sense of purpose. It wasn't an institutional religion or a rigid doctrine, but a way of reading history, of resisting cultural oppression, of affirming African dignity in a world that had built its prosperity on the denial of that dignity. The idea of Babylon as a symbol of oppressive power structures, the pursuit of Zion as an image of freedom and spiritual return, the awareness that the history of the African diaspora was a history of dispossession, but also of survival and pride. All of that entered the lyrics, the imagery, the tone of what was being sung. This gave reggae a dimension that few popular music forms have sustained with such consistency. The ability to be, at the same time, music that moves the body and music that makes you think, that asks you to remember, to resist. There's no contradiction in that, even if it seems like there might be at first. The music that has most deeply affected human communities has almost always been the kind that managed to bring together the sensory and the spiritual, the immediate and the historical. Reggae found that balance with a naturalness that made it accessible without hollowing it out. The voice in reggae isn't accidental either. There's a way of singing that values conviction over technical display. It's not that reggae singers lack vocal ability, it's that those abilities are in service of communication before performance. You sing so the message lands, so the emotion is genuine, so the listener feels there's a real person saying something real. That quality, sometimes called authenticity but more complex than that word captures, has a lot to do with why reggae managed to transcend its original context without losing its essence. Because that may be the most remarkable thing about it. Reggae travelled. It arrived in England with the Jamaican diaspora and became the soundtrack of communities that also knew what it meant to live on the margins, to face inequality, to need to assert their own existence. It reached Africa, where it found deep resonances with local musical traditions and liberation struggles that felt familiar. It spread to Latin America, the Caribbean, continental Europe, and Asia. And in each place it was absorbed, reinterpreted, and blended with local sounds without losing its recognizability. There's something in the pulse of reggae that is universally readable, that crosses languages and contexts, because it speaks to something that doesn't belong to a single culture. It speaks to the experience of resisting, of holding on, of seeking dignity in conditions that don't guarantee it. That ability to travel without hollowing out is also proof of its depth. Genres that survive only as trends adapt by losing what they were. Genres with real roots expand without dissolving. Reggae gave birth to direct descendants like dancehall and dub, which explored very different territories from each other but kept something of the original DNA, the centrality of the bass, the awareness of rhythm as space, the idea that music has something to say beyond sounding good. Dub, in particular, deserves its own moment because it took the logic of reggae somewhere unexpected. By stripping elements away, by letting echo and reverb fill the space where melody had been, by building texture from absence as much as presence, dub turned the recording studio into an instrument and anticipated decades of electronic music that would follow. The entire lineage of club music, of production as composition, of sound as space, has roots in what Jamaican musicians and engineers started doing with magnetic tape before there was even a name for it. The legacy of reggae doesn't live only in archives or in celebrations of the classics. It lives in musicians all over the world who name it as a foundational influence, in producers who still build with the same principles of space and weight, in communities that continue to find in that music a mirror and an affirmation. It also lives in the way it changed what we consider possible within a popular song. The idea that music can be simple on the surface and complex in its intention, that rhythm can be political, that stillness can be a form of strength. Some music changes the way you listen, not just by expanding what you know, but by altering something in your perception, in how you relate to sound, to time, to meaning. Reggae is that kind of music. Once the body learns to move with that counterweight, to feel the weight of the bass as something more than technique, to understand that the gap in the rhythm isn't a mistake but a choice, you don't hear the same way anymore. Something shifts in how you wait for music to arrive, in what you ask of it, in what you accept as enough. That's what the genres that truly matter leave behind. Not just songs, but an education, a way of listening that you carry into everything else. Reggae taught that music doesn't have to rush to say something important, that weight can sit low without the voice losing its height, that resistance doesn't need to shout to be heard. And that lesson, spoken in bass, in offbeats, in deliberate space, keeps vibrating with a clarity that time has not managed to quiet.